Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're going to talk a little bit more about the Carolina rig, because I just did a video the other day about the circumstances where you want to fish a Carolina rig versus a Texas rig and vice versa. And so far, you know, it's been well received. A lot of people seem to like the Carolina rig. There's definitely a lot of people that don't like the Carolina rig, calling it boring. I disagree, but overall, I've got some good questions. And one of the questions that I wanted to do a video on today was from Alan. Alan asks, I enjoy the info on your vids, just want to know what the circumstances are that determine the leader length on the C rig. Thanks. No, thank you, Alan, for the question. That is a really good question, because it's actually a topic that I've tried to figure out over the years, and over probably the last decade, I've kind of come up with my formula for choosing leader length on a Carolina rig, because I've experimented a lot with it. Again, Carolina rig is one of my absolute favorite techniques for a deep water fishing. It's one of those that I put in the strengths category for deep fishing. So anyways, let's get started. First off, I want to share with you guys the line that I'm going to be using for my Carolina rig. Of course, on a Carolina rig like this one right here, I rigged up this dummy Carolina rig here. You've got your main line that goes to your reel, and then you've got a leader that is connected to this whole system via a barrel swivel like that right there. And then of course you got the weight and the bead, which should be a material that doesn't chip. So glass really isn't a good choice nowadays, because most of the weights that we're using are tungsten, and tungsten will chip glass. This right here is a Fitzgerald flippin' bead, which is made to make contact with tungsten, and so it does work very, very well. I did have somebody on the last video comment that they've had some issues with chipping with these beads, but I have to say I've never had that issue, and I use them a lot. The one thing that I have had is I've had some that dent a little bit. Okay, but denting is not the same as chipping. When they dent, they don't have any sharp surfaces. When they chip, that's when you can slice your line, but I haven't had any issues with these beads in general. But anyways, so you've got two different lines, and I don't like to use the same line on both. So the main line, because this one is going to be dragging in the bottom, whether it's hard bottom, usually it's hard bottom. So like shell beds and stuff like that. So this is going to take a lot of abuse, the main line is. So I like to use pretty heavy line for the main line. Usually I'm using like 17 or 20 pound test. This is Abrazex from Seagar. Abrazex is called Abrazex because it's formulated for abrasion resistance, so extra abrasion resistance. So that's why I use Abrazex on the main line. But then on the leader, you're really not dragging this on the bottom that much. So it's not making a lot of bottom contact. The bait's kind of, not necessarily floating above, even though LazTech will float, but it's kind of gliding. And so it's not really grinding on the bottom, so you don't have to worry about that as much. That's not to say that you want to use, weak line. What I like to use is Seagar Gold Label, that right there. This is the same material that I use as my leader material on my spinning gear too. But I like it on the Carolina rigs because a Gold Label tends to be much thinner per pound test, so the diameter of the line is actually thinner. So you can upsize the strength of the line while maintaining the same diameter as a competitor's line. So for instance, like the 12 pound test Gold Label is pretty much the same diameter as many of the 10 pound test fluorocarbon competitors out there. So I can upsize the strength but downsize the diameter of the line. So I like to use Gold Label, and usually, man, I'm probably going to be sticking with 12 to 15 pound Gold Label for the leader material. I don't usually go a lot lower than that. You don't want to pair like a heavy main line, like a 20 pound test main line, with you know, like 10 or 8 pound test a fluorocarbon leader, because that's just, you know, it doesn't make any sense. You're probably going to break some leader material by doing that. But anyways, those are the lines that I use for my Carolina rig. So let's talk about leader length. So the first thing that you need to understand about choosing leader length is usually, you know, my leaders will vary anywhere from, you know, at their shortest, probably 14 inches, to at their longest, probably 5 feet or so, okay? Now, the first thing you have to think about is what's going on with the bait. You know, does the leader length increase the action or decrease the action, or what is the water clarity? So in general terms, the longer the leader that you have, the more subtle of an action your bait is going to have. So with a long leader, you've got this weight dragging on the bottom, and your worm just kind of glides in and then settles to the bottom when you pause it, and there's a lot of slack in between because it kind of glides and pushes that slack in the line, in the leader. And then when you start going again by dragging the weight, it will take a second for it to catch up. So it has a more subtle action when you have a longer leader in general, okay? Because it's not always just gonna stay tight like this, you know, especially if you have a bait that tends to kind of glide a little bit when you pause it, it'll put a lot of slack into that line. So there's a little bit of a lag time between when you start dragging your weight again and the bait starts moving, if that makes any sense. But the shorter the leader, the more action your bait is going to have. So the more direct correlation between action of the weight, the movement of the weight, and the action of the bait. So like if you have a real short leader, you know, when you move that weight, it's generally going to immediately start moving your bait. So it's a little bit more action, less freedom of movement and glide. So what that means as far as when to choose whichever is, as far as activity level, you know, if you want a bait that's a little bit more subtle and a little bit more finessey, you want a longer leader. However, if you want a bait that is you know, just moving pretty quick, it's got a lot of action to it, and you're primarily just moving a lot of water, then maybe you want to shorten up your leader a little bit. The other consideration you want to think about is water clarity. So the dirtier the water, probably the shorter the leader that you want, because you want that weight that is clicking against that bead to be very close to the bait, because in dirty water, the fish are going to hear the weight dragging on the bottom, just grinding through all those rocks and shells and stuff like that, and also the bead, you know, banging against the weight. And so that's going to attract fish in dirty water to investigate, to go check out and see what that sound is. And oftentimes you'll get a bite on the weight. So the fish will actually pick up the weight in dirtier water situations especially. So if you had a really long leader in that dirty water, the fish is going to investigate the weight, but the bait is going to be so far behind that they may not even find the weight, you know, or the bait, and they may not even be interested in it. But if you have a shorter leader, you know, that bait is right behind that weight, and they end up eating that bait. So actually, I have a really cool story. Wasn't a really cool story at the time, but it's one that's very relevant to this situation. I think it was back in like 2009 or something like that. I was fishing at BFL Regional on Clarks Hill Reservoir, and I was fishing these very, very shallow points. It was like October or November, I can't remember which month. I think it was late October, and we just had a major rainstorm. So there's a muddy line of water that was coming down the creek but hadn't arrived there the first day or so. And I was fishing these very, very shallow points. I'm talking like 1.5 foot deep, and fishing around dog fennel. And I was just crushing them. I was like, I am going to win this tournament. Ended up making the final day. And that final day, Actually, the second day, the bite started getting kind of weird. Like I started, you know, I still caught a lot of fish, still got a lot of bites, but the water was getting a little bit muddier, and I started noticing that I started bringing fish in that were hooked in the side. And I'm like, what is going on here? That's so weird that I've hooked multiple fish on the side. And the bites were definitely still kind of going down because of the water visibility. But I didn't really, you know, think too much about it. And then the third day, I ended up losing, I don't know, like 10 or so fish, like really good keepers, like plenty enough to win that tournament overall. Like but I ended up not catching a single keeper doing what I had been doing the first 2 days with the Carolina rig. I had lost all 10 of the bites, or however many bites I got on the Carolina rig, and almost every single one of them was hooked in the side, and then I'd lose them on the way in. Okay, so they stopped eating the bait and they started eating the weight. Which is something that I didn't understand at the time. I really didn't key in on that fact, and nowadays I know exactly what had happened, and I probably should have switched to either a very, very short leader or thrown something like a football jig or something like that, where the weight or the hook is right there where this actual sound's coming from, as opposed to the Carolina rig where they're eating the weight, there's no hook there. But ended up catching one fish on a wacky rig at the end of the day and finished, you know, I think 11th or something in that tournament. But I had the opportunity to win my first major tournament, and it was because I didn't understand what was going on, and I was still using a longer leader. So that is a anecdotal, you know, story on you know, why it's important to pay attention to leader length, especially when it comes to water clarity. So my general rule is the dirtier the water, the shorter the leader, because I want that weight to be pretty close to the bait. So if the fish come in and investigate that weight and the sound that's creating, the bait is not far behind and they eat the bait instead of the weight. But when it comes to clear water, it seems like the clearer the water, the longer the leader you want to have. And I generally don't go past 5 feet or 6 feet or something like that, because beyond that, it just gets really difficult to cast. And, you know, in tournament fishing, it's a little bit different than, you know, just fun fishing. I'm looking for efficiency, and so I generally don't go any longer than 5 or 6 feet, and that's a long leader. I would say my favorite leader length is, you know, in the 3 to 4 foot range overall. But anyways, dirtier water, shorter leader, and more action with shorter leader, and then you get less action with a longer leader, and it's better for clearer water in general. So hopefully this concept and my ideas on this make some sense, but overall that is kind of how I choose my leader length on a Carolina rig. So anyways guys, thank you very much for watching. Another thing that I'm going to throw in here, because I'm looking at it right now, is the fact that if I'm using a bait like a you know, mag fatties or a zinkers or something that is a do nothing straight tail worm or something like that, and that's what I'm dragging, usually a longer leader is going to be my choice. And then if I'm throwing something that has a lot of action, like the billy goat here that has those kicking tails, and I might throw a shorter leader, like something like a you know, a boar hogs, brush hog, that sort of deal. You might want to throw it on a shorter leader because you want more action. The bait already has a lot of action. But so that's another thing that I'll throw in there. But anyways guys, those are my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts on this. Do you agree? Do you disagree? I'd like to hear your comments below. So thank you guys for watching. Make sure you like, share, subscribe. I'm going to see you out on the water. Take care.